On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Willem Koenders. He is the global leader in data strategy at ZS. We're going to be talking about data strategy, but more specifically around AI and GenAI strategies. You know, we've had a lot of trends that have come and gone. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how this is going to be different. Data has always been a subject of top of mind, whether good or bad within the data space. And there's a lot of things you're going to have to do right to make sure your AI strategy actually works. And we're going to see how far we get. Willem's got a great background in all this stuff, and I'm excited to have him on the show. Thanks for being on.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Good. All right. Before we kick off, tell everyone what your company ZS does, and then we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. At CS, we help companies worldwide in all of their data strategy topics. At least that's the team that I'm a part of. That's what we do. We help them in kind of the data strategy, data management topics. And so that can be, the highest level, most strategic and abstract, figuring out what's my vision, what's my mission, what am I trying to do, down into, the definition and rollout of an operating model, like teams you need, skill sets you need. But also I spent many years, and I still am, doing a lot of kind of rolled up sleeves, like in the trenches of very specific actual, data management work, like think data quality work, think MDM implementation, things like that. So that's what we do. And it's a lot of fun. And as you said, there's some interesting new trends that are out there that kind of keep things interesting.
Absolutely. I am sure you are not lacking in areas to put your attention to these days, with how much focus is on generative AI or just AI solutions. I think sometimes we need to make a distinction because companies are looking at different strategies. I commented right before we recorded, and I think I hold true that we have seen data go through a big life cycle, and it typically always finds its way in getting stuck in certain particular areas, regardless of the trend. I guess when we're looking at AI, and obviously, the audience is technical, so they understand some of those nuances. When we're looking at a company that wants to take advantage of GenAI as a strategy, right? The previous data trends that have come and gone. What can we take from those? What can we learn from those previous trends in the past?
Yeah, I think probably at least two things that come to mind. For me, and one is just a sense of realism. That first and foremost, right? So because depending on your company and where you are in your use case, your business process, like GenAI is a tool. It's like a very shiny new tool, but that only works if you have the right kind of inputs to kind of put in that machine, right? If it were like let's say a hammer, like it may be a fantastic hammer, right? But if there's no nails anywhere in your neighborhood, then it's going to be idle, right? It's not going to be working. So there's something about realism and what can work, what can what are kind of some of the restrictions, and also not to necessarily set the wrong expectations with business stakeholders, because I think they've been around the block a couple of times now. They've saw the cloud transition come in. They saw big data. They saw a few of these other ones come in, and so they've some of them at least have been hurt by some of this before. That's kind of one bit in terms of realism, but also from a positive perspective, right? Because even there, there's ways that how can I pick, it's always start in a restricted way, some kind of scope, learn, and then scale. That's kind of almost a cliche, but how do you pick the right one, right? With the right stakeholder. It's not too complex, but it's also not insignificant because it has to appeal to the rest of the company. So there's tons of learnings around more, let's say, complex technologies that have come about before, and how can you make them work. The second part that I would reference is, so the data didn't change, right? The data management foundational things didn't change, right? And it's very similar. The types of kind of, let's say, 10, 12 foundational data capabilities that would really help you to drive GenAI quickly, safely, right? With the right business impact. They're the same capabilities as we've been studying for decades now. So think about data governance in terms of who owns it, what does good look like, what's the source of truth, think about data architecture patterns, think about interoperability standards, like all of these things we already know. And like it works both ways here. Like if all of that is already there, perfectly categorized, you know what data you have, where it sits, you know it's of a decent quality, then GenAI is by and large a piece of cake, right? It's just a tool that it just works. And in reverse, right? If it's not the case, GenAI is going to be like a bit frustrated, it may cause some frustration, and which means that in your implementations, like you can't jump to buying the hammer and start swinging it around. Like let's figure out where the wood is and what nails we want to use, before you actually start handing out the hammers.
I love those points, and it makes me think about, over the last 40 years, right? We've had reporting solutions that have required, like as you mentioned, certain types of data quality governance to really be effective. We've also seen a lot of companies struggle with that. And it seems that there's now all of a sudden a major impetus because if they want to do some kind of AI strategy, they need to get some of these ducks in a row. Because previously data governance was not fashionable. It was not something you were not hoping they were included. I mean, these are not positive things when data governance had to be included in these conversations. Data quality. I guess people are now realizing these are the cornerstones, as you were kind of alluding to. If you're a company that is looking to take advantage of an AI solution and you're like, well, these are the gaps that I had, is it a look back situation? Is it a build forward? Because if you are a legacy company and you have 50 years of data, that's hard.
Yeah. I mean, there's no easy answer to this. So I've had clients in the past where they literally decided to give up and they build a so-called Greenfield in one regional bank that we work with. They literally just gave up because exactly what you said, decades worth of legacies, lineage that was built in systems that can no longer be programmed anymore. It's like, how do you even start to, but still mission critical. That's the hard part because you can't turn them off because it actually still is mission critical. So like they just gave up, right? And they just part by part moved the business onto this kind of new digital greenfield situation. Like that's on one side. I think there are also a couple of companies, in particular the ones that are a bit younger or a bit more digital in nature already, like it's more important for their actually service model, who kind of invested early on in, cloud native processes and things like that. They may be it may be a bit more incremental and agile, how you can kind of go step by step. But to be honest, or at least for my personal experience, like 90% just sits somewhere in the middle, right? They have, it's not that they can want to throw away everything, but it's also hard enough for them. Like consultants or other folks who have now moved on were there when they made certain decisions and choices. Sometimes there's M&A activity as well, right? So you have it's not even within a company, but you just inherit some of the landscape that you kind of merge into the company. Like one of the approaches that you can, like, how can you then still chop away at it? And that's kind of this whole, the last couple of years, how this concept of data as an asset, but like specifically data assets or data products and domain-driven governance becomes very, very powerful, right? Because that's one way of, you can kind of typically, depending on a sector, it's anywhere between 10 and 20 usually, domains you can define. And we can say like, hey, within this domain, what's the most critical data that we know the rest of the company is going to depend on, right? And so you can kind of go a bit, step by step. So that's kind of how you can break it down a little bit. And also, don't fix all these domains and then come back to the rest of the group. But like, how can I do one or two? Show how it works, set the pattern, have the standards out there, and then kind of start to go to some of the other ones. At least that's something that doesn't just work, but it's also this fun, right? It's like you take a real bit of actual data, you address some of these age-old legacy gaps that were never addressed, like ownership. Almost always you would be surprised how something like data ownership comes back over and over and over and over again as one of the biggest challenges. Who at the end of the day is responsible for this data? Not the process, not the system, like the data. But good news, like decades worth of experience all across the world. Not me personally. I mean, I have some experience, not several decades, but the whole world's been battling these for so long. So yeah, some good patterns there.
Yeah, I guess, if you're looking at data strategy and AI and Gen AI strategy, what I'm hearing is that sometimes, depending on the company, the situation will be different. You might be able to work with some of the legacy data. You might not, depending on the age of the company. I guess every company then is going to approach this because some are thinking this is going to be a core competitive advantage. We're going to bring AI in. It's going to give us a actual core capability that we didn't have versus, you know what? We may not be able to take advantage of it, or it's going to be very difficult or costly. It's more of a co-pilot because it's only going to be helping drive certain areas, as you kind of were alluding to. And that's interesting because people are going to look back at those data decisions and realize that they are now in a position that they can or cannot maybe take advantage of the solution in a different way. If you're kind of looking at crystal ball, we're kind of just projecting out of core competitive advantage or assistance. Do you have an inkling, yet as to whether some of what we're talking about is going to be massive in terms of, hey, I'm just competitively better because my AI solution's better? Or is it going to be more like, hey, my people are just more productive because it's a co-pilot?
Yeah, I love how you put that. I think that's so critical when people start their journey and kind of what kind of objectives you kind of set out in the beginning and your ambitions, like the level of urgency, and frankly, even the relative size of the bet that you're making on it. Like, how successful do I need to be and how quickly? Right. That's like when I've come back to the data strategy in particular across these capability areas, it's very rare that people really realize that these are choices. Like, you really can do them in different ways. And, it's not one way that you can guarantee data quality or document metadata. There's really choices out there. But yeah, I love how you put it around like, how is it going to impact me? Like, there's a couple of industries or sectors out there, for example, like legal, right? A lot of the legal industry, where a ton of the competitive advantage has to do also about related to the apparatus of how quickly can you assess a given case, interpret what kind of previous cases are similar to this one, how you can then draft up, the opinions and some of the legal options that you have. Like, it's just a matter of time before there's someone somewhere or a selection of softwares that is going to be trained enough to be able to, that's going to revolutionize it. It goes so much quicker, so much better. The mistakes are going to be out. And people who can't wait, by the way, I don't know how much time we have, but there's hilarious examples of it going utterly wrong, right? Also. But like, and then you have what you said, like there's a company that I'm familiar with that they're like massive construction work, right? It's not going to change in the next year or two. In any case, not because of generative AI. It might actually in terms of architecture eventually, but let's say for now, not yet. And so but it does actually impact, for example, the way that they do contracting. Like, how quickly can they do the contracting? How quickly can they roll them out? So that's more in the margin of, their operational effectiveness for supporting processes, not the core ones. That's where you have to decide where you are. Like, but strategically, this is critical and possibly fatal. If you're in this first category, you will die, right? If you're not fast enough in developing a minimum amount of capability here, right? Accounting industry is another one. Like, that's why they're all looking into it. Like, you will be wiped out. It's a matter of time. In the second one, it's a little bit more about like dabbling in it. I used it in a different place where you can afford to kind of play around, like test it out a bit. The urgency is a bit lower. Like, it won't necessarily be fatal to your kind of survival, really. And so that's a difference. And some data leaders really appreciate that and understand, and some don't. And maybe the last thing I wanted to add in this respect is I met several months back over a certain lunch, let's say the group chief data officer of, let's say, a globally top 10 insurance company. And like, he just, at some point, he's like looking around because he didn't want to be overheard saying it, because everybody feels like it should be a priority to do some of these things. And he said, look, for the next couple of years, this is nice and it looks well in executive presentations, but our true core competitive advantage has nothing to do with some of these use cases that I see, right? So like we'll do it, but almost more for show, if that makes sense. But that was perhaps a bit strange to remark, but like it's very interesting and great to see that he was just aware of and had thought about like the broader competitive advantage, because kind of circling back to data management, data governance, like it has a bad rep because people see it as a cost still, right? So,
I think on a previous podcast, I mentioned to a guest and I had their view on this. And actually, I think it's going to be interesting to see how you consider this. Is technology trends typically at the onset are very technical, lots of heavy lifting from a technical perspective. As the technology matures, we get a lot of tools that help take away some of that complexity. I guess in the case of, obviously, mentioning someone who's, in a very probably large capacity type company, thinking it's not the right time for them. Is there a notion of, listen, the tools will get better, and that could be not 5 years as the typical trends. It could be 6 months. And maybe it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe we do need to get some of our house in order and think about that as a longer strategy versus let's just absolutely breakneck speed, just get something out because we want to. And I know you have to, board has expectations. If you're publicly traded, there's expectations. But from a strategic perspective, I'm expecting the tools to get easier for GenAI development and deployment and all that type of stuff. And products are going to start building it in, so we don't need to go natively build anything. Is there a business case of this insurance chief data analytics officer of you should be patient, should wait?
100%. I love that you say that. And so maybe just improvising a bit, because taking the example we just have on the legal industry, for example, right? So let's imagine like you're not, let's say, 2 lawyers, but you're like a sizable office, and you recognize this. Like, so you have an option here. Are you going to work with the foundation models that are out there today, and are you going to try to almost race to how can I be one of the first adopters, first creators almost of changing how quickly, how robust, how all these things I could use it? Or am I going to wait for the inevitable 1 or 2 or 3 standard tools that are going to be out there, right? So that is it depends very specifically on your sector, subsector, even region, what the respective regulatory authorities are going to allow for. But that's absolutely a decision. What you can do anyway today is strategize about that. Even like start thinking about this, and then start thinking about it in terms of like what needs to be true for a strategic option to be the right one or the wrong one. Because then at least you start thinking about, hey, if I'm so many months in and I see a certain pattern, or I see market growth, or I see these vendors appear, then you can kind of check back like which strategic option for you is the right one.
I like that. I think, it's kind of interesting to watch this because you see every software company in the world trying to embed their AI into their product. Some way, some capability, it doesn't matter. Everyone realizes there needs to be some features. And then you have enterprises that we've said are struggling with normal reporting solutions for 40 years. And you're kind of thinking about how this is going to go. And it's probably not what most chief data analytics officers or CTOs want to talk about. But I think it is a definite concern. And as you just mentioned, if we're going to see industry-wide or industry niche solutions coming out, there's other things that you can do in the meantime. And I guess if you are aware of the future goal and you can actually slow down the plan, is the game plan change? If you had the option to go, you know what, guys, we're not going to do anything AI for 2 years. We're gonna take in consideration some of the pieces that are then going to accelerate. Where would you start?
Also a great point. So that there's definitely no regret. Typically are no regret things you can do to kind of get your house in order, so that depending on the strategic option that becomes the most viable or powerful one, like you are indeed ready to go. And at least 2 come to mind, right? One is, and this is also shockingly rare that it actually exists. One is have an actual explicit articulated list of use cases. Like write down, like people in your business, commercial, product design, whatever departments, what are your actual use cases with let's say an understandable rationale and a value statement. And you can change them, right? You can change them if you learn more, but like have an actual inventory of this is extremely helpful, because you can later on grab these back to then figure out which of these is going to help me instead of is going to help my company. It's just not the helpful level of granularity. So that's one bit that is extremely helpful. Even if new use cases are going to pop up later on, or you're going to maybe demise others. So at least you have an inventory to start off of, and you can see, you already kind of know which one to prioritize. Second part is data landscape. Same thing, because so if you have the use cases, right, and you know what they're supposed to do, you already know what data they require too. You don't need to wait until, let's say the hammer is developed enough for you to start slamming the nails in. Like, we already know what nails we possibly need and in what wood they're going to have to go. It's like you can start thinking about those. That's where very basic, broad enterprise level foundations, at least minimally, in terms of like governance, ownership, having the domains called out, that's maybe one thing. But then specifically, again, like assets, right? What is the most strategic data? Let's make sure you know where it is and that it's looked after. If that is not in place, it's not going to work later on. And in fact, it can become a risk. And because one thing I wanted to add here still is, and that's a little different with GenAI than it is with other predictive analytics, kind of, when they came about, and maybe cloud technology, when you migrated data over and computation became less of an issue, is GenAI tends to make it, whatever you put in it, look elegant, right? So like so a lot of predictive models, if you put bad data in it, your predictions are going to be wrong. Like, you're very quickly and easily, you're going to see, oh shoot, this is not working, right? You can only imagine. I spent many years in financial industry about like predicting defaults like that. You're going to see that, and it's going to hurt if you get it wrong. Gen AI, in a lot of these use cases, the connection between what you put in and what comes out is much less transparent, right? So you detecting the influence of bad data will not be, well, it depends obviously on the use case, but by and large, will not be immediately apparent the first day you switch on the machine. And then it can become a problem later on, right? There's a hilarious example of this, I think New Zealand or Australian supermarket who made a recipe generator. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the example. It's one of the front page ones, which worked, but then people started to put like non-food ingredients in there, like very harmful gases and whatnot. And it would just like give you a recipe, which would be lethal to actually eat. And then, you hadn't checked for it.
Yeah. I honestly, I think that's a great insight, because I think, the way I kind of think about it is very similar to the way you kind of articulating it. Is, if I don't have my house in order and I'm not doing this from scratch, I'm not going to start Greenfield to support this, I have technical debt somewhere. And if I haven't figured it out, I am at risk. And Gen AI sits on top of this, and you're expecting that there's a level of trust and adoption based on the output. If the output is not trustworthy, it's inaccurate, people won't adopt it, they won't use it. I think there's a lot of cart before the horse. And I think, when we see the stock for NVIDIA go up in an astronomical fashion, we see other companies that are Adobe's implementing some wonderful AI, but also it's an AI built use case specific for what they're doing. I can see how that is something they can hone and perfect, because they've also been working on it for a while, I'm sure. But when we're talking about enterprises, like, it could be just any enterprise. It could be any enterprise that has a ton of data. I kind of look at what you've just said as a crucial factor of, you have to deal with the media hype. I understand when you're in a visible role, CEO is going to ask you, what's our AI strategy? If you say no, he's not going to be happy. But then, deep down, you have to produce something that's of value and adoption. I think the adoption piece is going to be interesting, because I think ChatGPT and these other GPTs are setting up expectations that answers are output in a certain way, and that's what we're going to see. I'm of the belief that solutions for the enterprise are not going to be so linear as, here's my problem and tell me the answer so I can just go plug it in. I don't see, not for a while. I see more co-pilots, or here's options, or did you think about this, or you missed this? Just maybe last question. I know you have to get back to actually doing your day job, but last question, I guess, is as you kind of see, again, crystal ball moment, are we going to see different enterprise solutions than maybe what people are used to on the consumer side at this point?
You're gonna have to, I think. But so I mean, there's a lot of simple question, a lot of answers to that. So there is like the consumer experience is going to shape what the enterprise requirements are going to be, right? Because a lot of people are going to know that and be aware of it, and so they are going to be demanding something similar. You saw something very similar in the past with digital journeys that people have to onboard new banks, for example, accounts. Like those expectations have then actually started internally when we talk about platforms. Like that's a requirement that started to be there as well. So there will for sure be like they'll be identical, right, in a way that and I completely agree with you, definitely in the beginning and probably for the majority of actual use cases for a while. It's just a tool. It's like Excel or Tableau or something. And so like you can use it, if you're really good at it, you have a lot of fun with it. If you put silly things in it, well, it's going to probably give you a lot of silly things out of it. And you're going to have companies who are going to start thematically like boxing it up a little bit, right? I mentioned the legal example. You're going to have another one who's going to do risk assessment. I myself am an amateur writer, so I'm paying for this kind of like, how do you actually write a story a bit quicker, for example. Like they're basically going to like encapsulate a couple of these things in a very niche area. But the enterprise solution is depending on the use case again, but the interesting ones for the most part, like they have privacy restrictions. And so the huge difference between something like GenAI versus visualization tools and some of the other predictive models is that it tends to want to communicate with the language model that's out there, right? So you need to give it inputs. It goes back to this model, which is going to interpret it, generate the content, come back to you. But the problem is for a lot of companies, that's a huge issue because you would have to share client names or certain details that you can't, even if they're not necessarily foundational, it's not in a strictest sense, PI or PII or PHI, they're at least giving away your business model too. So like that's like now you've got these enterprise solutions are going to have to account for this. And so there's a couple of options. And they're very, again, this is where in your very first question, like what are the lessons from the past, right? So there's patterns that we're going to have to kind of repeat in a way. Some of them are going to do the on-prem, but it's not really on-prem, but you know what I mean? It's got the boxed in, you have a model that just works within the confines of your company. If you have a big company with a lot of budget, that could work. It could, in some cases, de-identification or anonymization could work. Maybe if my bank, changes my name into Joe, someone, and they give some facts back, it actually, the personalized note back to me is usable if they later on substitute back in my name. Sometimes not, right? Those are kind of some of the options. And then you also have enterprises at the highest level. The insurance one that I referenced earlier is one of them who just categorically have said, we're not doing it right now. Like we're going to wait until the regulator has come with a perspective, until we see how it's going to truly change some of the dynamics in the marketplace. And we're going to have to wait. But I think that's maybe a couple of things like maybe for people to think about in terms of like how to enable and activate and start preparing for doing this at scale.
I was going to say, I've a million and one other questions based on this area because this is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about when an AI data strategy comes up, is the implications around privacy, ethics. We haven't even scratched the surface, so maybe we'll have to have you come back for a part 2 and dive into that, because I think there are things in there that, in the rush, as you kind of alluded to, we're not even really thinking about that can be catastrophic. It goes back to something that I really think, and maybe this will be what we can pick up on a part 2, is if you're looking for this to be a competitive advantage, you actually have to first figure out how much you're willing to invest on the privacy side and the governance side because you're going to have a different solution than the one that's leveraging a AI that might not live in your particular sandbox per se.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you get back to it. I appreciate your time. If somebody wants to reach out to you, we're just scratching the surface on a lot of these topics. It could be discussions. I'm sure you know a lot more than we've even gotten close to sharing. And if somebody wants to reach out to you, pick your brain, what's a good way of connecting with you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest.
Okay.
I use it actively, so any note there, I will read personally. And from there, you can find my blog and some other place. So LinkedIn is probably the easiest.
Brilliant. We will make sure to include that in the show notes. Willem, thank you for being on and being a guest. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I love this discussion, not about what GenAI can do. We've already seen the art of the possible. I think ChatGPT 4.0 came out and we're like, video, wow, this is all cool. But to take advantage of it is going to be completely different. I think Willem mentioned some fantastic points looking back, looking forward. And I think if you know anyone else is thinking about or has implemented or is looking to implement, share this episode. I think this is going to help them. Please like, subscribe, comment, review. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.